Gallop at dusk, the horse races of Tegalwaton. The sun was descending over the hills of Tegalwaton, stretching long shadows across the open field where the crowd had already begun to gather. The air was warm, but not stifling, carried by a slow breeze that rustled the distant rice fields and swayed the bright flags hanging from bamboo poles. In this quiet village just outside Salatiga, nestled between green ridges and sacred springs, the stillness of the countryside was replaced by the electric murmur of excitement. It was race day, and not just any race, but the long-awaited Sorhari Pacuan kuda, the late afternoon horse race, a rare but beloved tradition that brought together not just locals, but visitors from neighboring regions. The track was a simple oval of packed earth, its boundaries marked with painted tires, low fencing, and colorful cloth tied to stakes. Dust rose gently with every footstep across it, creating a golden haze beneath the late afternoon sun. In the middle of the field, horses snorted and pawed at the ground, their coats glistening with sweat and oil, their manes braided neatly by their handlers. Young boys ran barefoot between stalls and food carts, their laughter mixing with the clanging of pots and the occasional blare of traditional music from a nearby speaker. Vendors roasted satay beside clouds of fragrant smoke, and a woman poured glasses of es kelapa muda to eager onlookers. The air was thick with a mix of spice, sweat, and anticipation. I found a spot near the southern turn of the track, beneath a low tree whose shade offered modest relief from the golden heat. Around me, families sat on plastic mats, vendors pushed carts of snacks, and older men leaned against their motorcycles with eyes narrowed toward the paddock. The races hadn't started yet, but the atmosphere buzzed with quiet thrill. A trumpet call rang out, not polished, but spirited, and the announcer's voice echoed through the crackling speaker system. Ladies and gentlemen, the third race will begin shortly. Riders to the gate. At that cue, all heads turned. The horses trotted toward the starting line, accompanied by their jockeys, boys no older than 16, dressed in jerseys of red, green, and gold. They wore no saddles, only thin reins, and they rode bareback with the precision of years of training passed down from father to son. The crowd hushed as the horses aligned. Their muscles twitched under tight control, hooves shifting with impatience. The boys leaned forward, eyes like arrows fixed ahead. A brief silence hung in the air. Then, bang, the starter flag dropped. The horses exploded forward in a burst of speed and dust. The crowd roared. A blur of muscle, sweat, and color tore down the track. The earth shook faintly with every stride. The boys crouched low, whispering to their horses, guiding them with weight and instinct more than force. Dust flew into the air like smoke, golden under the lowering sun. They approached the southern turn, my turn, and I could see every detail. The grimace on the lead jockey's face, the tension in the legs of the chestnut stallion beneath him, the sweat glistening on the flanks of the competitors. The sound was thunderous, echoing in my chest. And then, whoosh, they flew past, leaving behind only the storm of their wake. The final straight stretch triggered another roar from the crowd. People stood, shouted, fists in the air. Bets had been made, quietly, discreetly, and now hopes rode on the backs of flying horses. In the final seconds, one horse surged ahead, a lean gray mare with her young rider pressing desperately into the wind. With a final burst of power, they crossed the line. The crowd erupted, drums pounded from the local gamelan group, and someone set off a string of small firecrackers that crackled above the din. The winners were cheered, the losers consoled. Riders walked their exhausted horses back to the shade, their hands shaking from adrenaline and joy. But no one left, because it wasn't just about winning. It was about belonging. As the next race was prepared, I wandered toward the paddock area where the horses were being cooled down. A man, perhaps in his 60s, stood beside a handsome bay stallion, brushing its neck gently with a straw brush. He caught me watching and smiled. "This one's named Peter, like lightning. Fast, but stubborn," he said with a laugh. I introduced myself, and we exchanged words. His name was Pacuan, a local horse trainer. He had been involved in horse racing since he was a child, first as a water boy, then handler, now mentor. He spoke of horses like family members, each with personality, history, and spirit. "Racing here," he said, "is not for prestige. It's for tradition. It's for keeping the soul of our village alive." He told me how horses had once been common in the hills around Tegalwaton, used not only for racing but also for farming, transport, ceremonies. While most villages had traded hooves for engines, some still clung to the rhythm of gallops and reins. The races were one way to honor that past. I thanked him and returned to the track just in time for the fourth race. This time, the field had 5 horses. The sun now dipped low on the horizon, and the sky behind the hills turned a fiery orange. Dust rose higher in the orange light, and the world seemed softer, almost cinematic. This race was closer than the last. 2 horses were neck and neck all the way to the final stretch. The crowd stood on its toes, eyes wide, mouths open in silent suspense. Then, just as the finish line approached, a loud cheer broke out. A dark horse, nearly forgotten in the earlier laps, had surged forward like a shadow from nowhere, slipping past both leaders in the final strides. The upset winner drew gasps and applause. The jockey, barely 15, was lifted from his horse by his uncle, and both of them laughed and cried at once. In the fading light, the final race was called. Lanterns were lit one by one, casting soft glows around the field. The announcer thanked everyone for coming, his voice now tired, but proud. The crowd began to shift, but no one hurried. Children danced in the dust. Riders fed their horses sugar cubes and whispered thanks into their ears. Parents gathered bags. Lovers walked hand in hand. And I just stood there for a moment, trying to memorize everything. The smell of the field. The sound of hoofbeats echoing in my chest. The glow of the last sunray on the horse's sweat-soaked mane. Tegalwaton, in that golden hour, was more than a village. It was a story, a living poem of speed, dust, tradition, and joy. As I walked back toward the road, I looked over my shoulder one last time. The track, now empty, still shimmered faintly with dust in the twilight. Somewhere in the distance, a horse neighed. And just like that, the day galloped into memory.